The forest burned with tracer fire. Elena Brennan felt the cold steel press against her temple before she heard the voice. Metal on bone, sharp and final. Around her, the night erupted in orange muzzle flashes and the wet thump of bodies hitting mud. End of the line, American. The accent was Eastern European. Russian, probably. His breath reeked of tobacco and cheap vodka. The barrel dug harder into her skull, forcing her head down. Her knees sank into the wet earth. 43 hours into the mission, and this was how it would end. She thought of Brennan, of his final words 6 months ago in that sterile VA hospital room, of the promise she'd made at his graveside. "I'm sorry, Dad, I tried." The mercenary's finger tightened on the trigger. But he didn't know. None of them knew that the woman kneeling in the dirt with blood streaking her face was about to do what James Brennan had taught her when she was 14 years old. The move he'd drilled into her 1,000 times until it became muscle memory, until it became instinct. Her left hand shot up, deflecting the barrel away from her skull. In the same fluid motion, she drove her right elbow backward into his solar plexus. The gun fired a deafening crack that left her ears ringing, but the bullet went wide, sparking off a rock 10 feet away. She twisted, seized his wrist, used his own momentum to flip him forward over her shoulder. He hit the ground hard enough to crack ribs. Before he could gasp for air, Elena's knee was on his throat. She took his weapon, checked the magazine in one fluid motion, then melted back into the shadows as he returned fire, tore through the space where she'd been standing. 3 seconds. 3 movements. Gone. Ghost actual report status. The radio crackled in her ear, Colonel Hayes' voice tight with tension. Elena pressed deeper into the undergrowth, controlling her breathing. Contact. Still mission capable. How many? She counted muzzle flashes through the trees. At least 8, maybe 10. A pause, then, can you evade? Elena looked at the compass strapped to her wrist. Brennan's compass, the one his instructor had given him in 1984. 40 years old and still pointing true north. That's the plan, sir. She cut the transmission and became a ghost. 72 hours earlier, Fort Lewis, Washington gleamed under November rain. The kind of cold, persistent drizzle that soaked through everything and reminded you that the Pacific Northwest didn't do seasons, it did gray. Elena Brennan stood at attention in her dress uniform, facing a panel of 5 officers seated behind a long table. Every one of them was male. Every one of them was over 40. And every one of them looked at her like she was a problem they hadn't asked for. Colonel Marcus Hayes sat center, his silver hair cropped close in the old military style. 52 years old, Delta Force background, with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. He studied her service record without looking up. "Miss Brennan," his voice carried the flat authority of command. "This unit has never accepted a female operator." Elena kept her gaze forward. "Yes, sir." "Not due to policy," Hayes continued, "due to results. In the 5 years Ghost Unit has existed, no woman has passed our field qualification test." To Hayes' left, Captain Morrison leaned forward. 45 infantry background with the weathered face of a man who'd spent his career in the dirt. "The wilderness doesn't care about equal opportunity, young lady. It doesn't care about your feelings or your politics. It cares about whether you can survive." "I understand, sir." Hayes finally looked up. His eyes were the color of steel. Do you, because what we do here isn't normal special operations. We don't work in teams. We don't have backup. Ghost Unit operators work alone in denied territory with nothing but their training and their will to survive. He tapped her file. "You understand this is a 72-hour solo survival and retrieval mission, alone in the Cascade Wilderness with minimal gear, no GPS, no satellite phone, and no safety net." "I do, sir." Morrison shook his head. "Then you're either very brave or very stupid." Elena said nothing. Brennan had taught her that silence was often the best response. "Let your work speak for itself," he had said. "Words are cheap. Results are what men respect." Hayes turned a page in her file. His expression changed subtly. "It says here you were trained by Master Sergeant James Brennan." Elena felt her chest tighten. "Yes, sir." "For how long, Betty?" 6 years, sir, from age 11 to 17. Then I enlisted and served under his mentorship until—" She paused, forcing her voice steady. "Until he passed away 6 months ago." The room fell quiet. Even Morrison sat back, his skepticism momentarily checked. Hayes reached into his briefcase and pulled out a letter. The paper was worn folded and unfolded many times. Brennan sent me this 7 months ago, before he died. He began to read aloud. Colonel Hayes, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Cancer finally got me like it got half my generation. But before I go, I need to ask you for something. I'm writing to recommend Elena Brennan for Ghost Unit. Elena's throat closed. She hadn't known about this letter. Brennan had never mentioned it. Hayes continued, I know your policy. I know the history. I know that no woman has passed your test. But I trained this girl myself from the ground up, and I'm telling you straight, she has every skill I learned in Desert Storm, Kosovo, and 20 years of mountain warfare training. Hayes looked up at Elena, then back at the letter. Give her the same test you gave me in '92, the Ghost Protocol. If she fails, you lose nothing. If she succeeds, you gain the best operator I ever trained. He paused. Brennan signed it one ranger to another. Give her a shot. You won't regret it. The silence stretched, rain drummed against the windows. Finally, Hayes folded the letter carefully and placed it back in his briefcase. Brennan saved my life twice. Once in the Gulf, once in Kosovo. I owe him a debt I can never repay. He met Elena's eyes. But I won't lower the standards for anyone. Not for him, not for you, not for God himself. I'm not asking you to, sir. Good. Hayes stood. The other officers followed suit. You get one chance, the Ghost Protocol test. 72 hours in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Same mission we give every candidate. No modifications, no exceptions. When do I start, sir? Hayes almost smiled. Almost. Tomorrow at 0200, briefing at 1800 today. Dismissed. Elena saluted, executed a perfect about-face, and walked out of the room with her spine straight and her heart hammering. Outside, the rain had intensified. She stood under the building's overhang, letting the cold air clear her head. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the compass. Brennan's compass. The brass was worn smooth from decades of use, the glass face scratched but still clear. She opened it. Inside the lid, taped carefully in place, was a small photograph. Brennan in his dress uniform, much younger, standing with a group of rangers. He was grinning, full of life and certainty. She'd taken that photo from his bedside table after he died. I'll make you proud, Dad, she whispered. The compass needle swung found north and held steady. The briefing room was sparse and functional. A large topographical map covered one wall, showing the rugged terrain of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Hayes stood before it with a pointer, his movements precise and economical. Elena sat alone in the front row. Behind her, 4 male candidates occupied the other seats. She could feel their eyes on her back, could hear their whispered comments, could sense their skepticism radiating like heat. Hayes began without preamble. The Ghost Protocol test has one objective: survival and mission success in denied territory. You will be inserted 40 miles into the Cascade Wilderness at 0200 tomorrow. Your mission is to navigate to these coordinates. He tapped the map. Retrieve an intelligence package and return to the extraction point within 72 hours. He turned to face them. You will carry no GPS, no satellite phone, no electronic navigation aids, compass map, and your training. That's it. You will have an emergency beacon, but if you activate it, you fail. One of the candidates raised his hand. Jake Patterson, 26, fresh from Ranger School, with all the confidence of youth. Sir, what if we encounter hostiles? There are no hostiles. This is a navigation and survival test, not a combat exercise. But sir, what if— Hayes cut him off with a look. Then you deal with it, like you would in real operations. Ghost Unit doesn't get do-overs, Patterson. Neither does this test. He turned back to the map. In the 5 years this unit has existed, 12 men have attempted the Ghost Protocol. 4 succeeded. Average completion time is 66 hours. The fastest was Sergeant Collins at 66 hours, 17 minutes. Hayes paused. He's now one of our best operators. Elena studied the map, committing every contour line to memory. The terrain was brutal. Ridge lines and ravines, dense forest and exposed rock. Water sources were scattered. The weather forecast showed rain and dropping temperatures. Good, she thought. Brennan had trained her in worse. Hayes distributed packets to each candidate. Your detailed maps and coordinates. Study them tonight. Memorize what you can. You leave your packets here before insertion. Elena opened hers. The topography was even more challenging than the wall map suggested. Steep elevation changes, narrow defiles areas marked with warnings about rockfall and unstable ground. She felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was the world Brennan had taught her to love. The world where skill mattered more than politics. Where the terrain didn't care about your gender or your background. It only cared whether you understood its language. And Brennan had taught her that language fluently. After the briefing, she returned to her barracks and began her preparations. The gear allowance was minimal by design, 50 pounds maximum including water. She laid everything out on her bunk with military precision. Brennan's compass, his old fixed blade knife carbon steel with a worn leather handle, 50 feet of paracord, a canteen, water purification tablets, a fire starter, a lightweight tarp, basic first aid, one MRE, and the paper map already creased where she'd folded it to show her route. No GPS watch like the other candidates were packing, no fancy electronics, no satellite communicator. Just the tools Brennan had taught her to trust. She was inspecting the knife's edge when someone knocked on her doorframe. She looked up to find Jake Patterson leaning against it, arms crossed, a smirk playing at his lips. "That's some old-school gear, Brennan." Elena said nothing, went back to checking her equipment. Jake stepped inside uninvited. "I mean, I respect the dedication to tradition and all, but this isn't 1990. We've got technology now. GPS, satellite comms, night vision, all of which needs batteries," Elena said quietly, not looking up. "All of which can fail. And a compass can break. Not if you know how to use it properly." She set the knife down and met his eyes. "My father survived 4 combat tours with less gear than this. I'll survive 3 days." Jake's smirk faded slightly. "Your father was James Brennan, right? The guy Hayes keeps talking about." "Yes. He must have been something special." Elena felt the familiar ache in her chest. "He was." "So why are you really doing this?" Jake asked, and for a moment his cockiness dropped away, replaced by genuine curiosity. "Why put yourself through this when you know they don't want you here?" Elena stood meeting him at eye level. She was 5'7", lean and compact, every inch of her built for endurance rather than power. But when she spoke, her voice carried Brennan's steel, "Because he believed I could. And I don't break promises to dead men." Jake blinked, taken aback. Then he nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you make it. Not because you're a woman, but because anyone trained by Brennan deserves respect." When he was gone, Elena sat back down on her bunk and opened the compass again. She stared at Brennan's photograph, remembering. 17 years earlier. The refugee camp outside Fallujah smelled of diesel fuel and desperation. Elena was 11 years old and she'd been alone for 3 days. 3 days since the IED had torn through her parents' convoy. 3 days since she'd watched the smoke rise from the highway, knowing they were gone. 3 days of wandering the camp, stealing food, sleeping in corners, invisible in the chaos of war. She was trying to steal an MRE from a supply pallet when the hand closed on her wrist. She spun, ready to fight, and found herself looking up at a man in dusty fatigues. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to see right through her. Master Sergeant James Brennan, though she didn't know his name yet. 45 years old Army Ranger with 23 years of service etched into every line of his face. "You hungry?" he asked. His voice was gravel and smoke, but not unkind. Elena said nothing, just glared at him with all the defiance an 11-year-old could muster. Brennan looked at the MRE she'd been trying to steal, then back at her. "Or are you just testing to see if you can get away with it?" "Both," Elena said. To her surprise, Brennan smiled. "Honest, I like that." He released her wrist and picked up the MRE, tossing it to her. "You can have it, but let me ask you something. Can you feed yourself tomorrow? And the day after? And the day after that?" Elena clutched the MRE to her chest. "I'll figure it out." "I'm sure you will, but there's a difference between surviving and living." He gestured toward his unit's compound. "You want to eat today? Come with me. You want to learn how to eat every day? Stay." Elena hesitated. Every adult in her life had either died or abandoned her. Why should this soldier be different? But something in his eyes, a steadiness, a certainty made her follow. That was the day her real education began. Brennan's training compound was a small forward operating base tucked into the hills outside the city. It was temporary functional and filled with soldiers who didn't ask questions when their sergeant brought back a scrawny Iraqi girl. "She's with me," was all Brennan said, and that was enough. For the first month, Elena just watched. Watch the soldiers train, watch them plan operations, watch them return from missions with that thousand-yard stare she'd recognize the rest of her life. Brennan fed her, gave her a corner to sleep in, and asked nothing in return. But slowly he began to teach her. It started with small things: how to read a map, how to tell direction by the sun, how to walk quietly through gravel without crunching. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked one day while they were studying a topographical map. Brennan looked at her over the paper. "Because everyone should know how to find their way home, and because you're smart enough to learn." As months passed, the lessons grew more complex: land navigation, weather prediction, how to find water, how to build a shelter, how to start a fire in the rain. "You see these young soldiers," Brennan said one evening while they watched a training exercise. "They've got GPS units, satellite phones, night vision goggles, all the latest tech. You know what happens when their batteries die?" Elena shook her head. "They're lost, helpless." He tapped his temple. "But if you train your mind, if you learn to read the land like a language, you're never lost. Technology fails, training doesn't." By the time Elena was 12, she could navigate by stars, purify water 3 different ways, and identify edible plants from poisonous ones. By 13, she could track game through the hills and return to camp without getting lost once. But the real test came when she was 14. Brennan's unit was conducting a night navigation exercise in the mountains east of the base. Elena had begged to come along, and he'd relented, making her promise to stay close and follow orders. The exercise was supposed to be routine: a night march, some basic patrol tactics, then back to base by dawn. Instead, they walked into an ambush. The first shots came from the ridge line above them. Brennan's unit was spread out along a narrow trail caught in a natural kill zone with cliffs on one side and a steep drop on the other. "Contact right," someone shouted, and the night exploded with gunfire. Brennan grabbed Elena and shoved her behind a boulder. "Stay down, don't move." But Elena had already seen the problem. The ambush was well planned, the enemy holding the high ground with interlocking fields of fire. Brennan's unit couldn't advance, couldn't retreat. They were pinned. The lieutenant was shouting into his radio, calling for support, but Elena heard the static. The radio was jammed or broken. They were on their own. She looked at Brennan and saw the calculation in his eyes. He was running through options, trying to find a way out. But there wasn't one. Not from where they were. "Stay here," she said. "Elena, no." But she was already moving, slipping away from the boulder into the darkness before he could stop her. She'd spent 2 years learning to move through terrain like this, learning to use every shadow, every fold in the ground, every sound of wind and water to mask her movement. Brennan had taught her the mountains the way some people taught language, immersively, until she thought in topography. She circled wide, using a dry creek bed to move below the enemy's line of sight. Her heart hammered, but her breathing stayed controlled. Fear was just information, Brennan had told her. It tells you danger is present. It doesn't get to make decisions. The enemy's ammunition supply was where she'd expected, 30 yards behind their firing line, guarded by one man who was more interested in watching the fight than watching his rear. Elena picked up a rock, threw it into the bushes to her left. The guard spun, rifle raised, moving to investigate. She was past him in seconds, silent as smoke. The ammunition crates were wooden olds stacked carelessly. She found what she needed quickly: a box of grenades, the pins already loose from age and neglect. She didn't know much about explosives, but she knew fire. She pulled her lighter, a gift from Brennan, and held it to the corner of a wooden crate. The dry wood caught quickly, flames spreading faster than she'd anticipated. She ran. Behind her, the fire reached the grenades. The first explosion lit up the mountainside, then the second. Then the whole cache went up in a rolling blast that echoed through the valley. The enemy's firing positions fell silent, confusion and panic taking over as their supply dump burned. Brennan's unit seized the moment, advancing through the chaos while the ambushers scattered. By the time Elena made it back to the rally point, the fight was over. 6 enemy killed, 2 wounded, 0 friendly casualties beyond what they'd already taken. Brennan was waiting for her. His face was unreadable. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. Elena nodded, waiting for the punishment. Instead, Brennan pulled her into a fierce hug. You saved our lives, kid. Every single one of us. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. That's the best field craft I've seen since Ranger School in '89. Where'd you learn to move like that? Elena managed a small smile. You taught me. From that day forward, Brennan trained her seriously, not as a curiosity or a charity case, but as a soldier. When she turned 17, he sat her down and laid out the options. You can stay here, or you can enlist. If you enlist, I'll make sure you end up somewhere that values what you can do. I want to enlist, Elena said without hesitation. I want to be like you. Brennan shook his head. Don't be like me. Be better. She enlisted the next month, and Brennan pulled every string he had to keep her in units where he could mentor her. 10 years of joint training, exercises, deployments, to hostile territory missions that honed her skills until they were sharp as his old knife. Until she wasn't just good, she was exceptional. And then the cancer came, 6 months earlier. The VA hospital in Seattle was clean and sterile and utterly wrong for a man like James Brennan. He should have died in mountains or deserts, not under fluorescent lights, with machines beeping their useless encouragement. Elena sat beside his bed, holding his hand. He was 62 years old, but the cancer had aged him 20 years and 6 months. His grip was weak, his breathing labored. I wrote Hayes, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Told him about you, about Ghost Unit. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. You're ready, Elena. You've been ready since you were 15. You just don't believe it yet. I'm not ready without you. Brennan managed to smile. That's the fear talking. Fear is just information, remember. It doesn't get to make decisions. He reached to his nightstand, picked up his compass with trembling fingers. My instructor gave me this in 1984, first day of Ranger School. He told me it would always point me home. He pressed it into her palm. Now it's yours. Elena's vision blurred. I can't. You can, you will. His eyes found hers, and for a moment the old fire was back. Hayes is old school like me. He doesn't believe women can do what we do. Prove him wrong. Not with words, with results. What if I fail? Then you fail like a ranger, with your head up and your honor intact. He coughed a wet, painful sound. But you won't fail, because I trained you and I don't train failures. His breathing grew more labored. The machine started beeping faster. The force doesn't lie, kid, Brennan whispered. It's honest. It doesn't care about politics or opinions, only about whether you respect it and understand its language. His grip tightened one last time. Let it show them who you are. He died that night with Elena holding his hand and the compass pressed between their palms. At his funeral, she'd stood in her dress uniform and made a promise to his flag-draped coffin. She would earn that spot in Ghost Unit. She would prove that everything he'd taught her mattered. She would make him proud. Present day. Elena woke at midnight, 3 hours before insertion. She didn't need an alarm. Brennan had trained that into her too. The ability to wake at will rested in alert. She dressed in the dark, every movement precise and practiced. Base layer for warmth, outer layer for weather resistance. Boots broken in over hundreds of miles. She braided her dark hair tight against her skull, then covered it with a watch cap. The gear was already packed and checked twice. She did it again anyway. Brennan's voice in her head, preparation prevents problems. Check everything twice, then check it again. At 01:30, she reported to the hangar where the helicopter waited. The other candidates were already there, looking nervous and excited in equal measure. Jake Patterson gave her a nod of acknowledgement. The others ignored her. Hayes stood before them, clipboard in hand. Last chance to drop out. No shame in recognizing you're not ready. No one moved. Good. Patterson, you're inserting at grid 7-7. Collins, grid 8-2. Reynolds, grid 6-9. He looked at Elena. Brennan, you're at grid 5-5. The hardest terrain, same as I gave your father in 92. Elena felt the weight of that statement. Hayes wasn't cutting her any breaks. He was honoring Brennan by treating her the same way he'd treated him. Sir, she said, thank you. Hayes almost smiled. Don't thank me yet. You've got 72 hours of hell ahead of you. The helicopter ride was long and cold and loud. Elena sat with her eyes closed, running through the map in her mind. The insertion point was at the forest's edge, elevation 2,000 feet. The package was at 4,200 feet, 12 miles distant, as the crow flew, but she wasn't a crow. The terrain would add another 10 miles, at least maybe 15. She thought about Brennan, about every lesson he'd taught her, about the promise she'd made. The helicopter banked hard, descending toward a small clearing, barely visible in the darkness. Hayes's voice crackled through her headset. 5 minutes to insertion, Brennan. Package is at the coordinates I gave you. Retrieve it and return to extraction point within 72 hours. After that, we leave without you. Understood, sir. Emergency beacon is for life-threatening situations only. Use it and you fail. Yes, sir. A pause, then quieter. Good luck, soldier. Make Brennan proud. The helicopter touched down. Elena jumped into knee-high grass, immediately dropped into a crouch, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. The helicopter lifted off behind her, the rotor wash flattening the grass and drowning out all other sound. Then it was gone and she was alone. Elena pulled out Brennan's compass, checked her bearing by the dim glow of starlight filtering through broken clouds. North-northwest, climbing into the Cascade Mountains, into the wilderness that had broken 4 out of 12 candidates before her. She allowed herself one moment of doubt, one quiet acknowledgement of the fear trying to crawl up her spine. Then she pushed it down, locked it away, and started walking. The forest swallowed her whole. Hour 7, the terrain was worse than the map had suggested. The first 6 hours had been a grinding climb through dense forest, the undergrowth thick with brambles and devil's club that tore at her clothes despite her careful movement. Elena navigated by compass and terrain association the way Brennan had taught her. The stars were useless under the forest canopy, but she could read the slope of the land, the way water had carved through the soil over centuries, the subtle differences in vegetation that told her where she was. She found a small stream and followed it uphill, knowing it would lead toward the ridgeline she needed to cross. The water was cold and clean, and she refilled her canteen without bothering with purification tablets. This high up, this remote, the water was safe enough. As dawn broke gray and cold through the trees, Elena paused to check her position. She pulled out the map, oriented it to the terrain, and marked her estimated location. 7 hours and maybe 4 miles of progress. Slow, but she'd expected that. The hardest climbing was still ahead. She ate an energy bar from her pack and allowed herself 5 minutes of rest. Not because she was tired, Brennan had trained that out of her, but because rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes led to injury or death. The forest around her was waking up. Birds calling, squirrels chittering in the canopy, the distant sound of something larger moving through the brush. Deer probably, or maybe elk. She was about to start moving again when she saw it. A trail marker. It was subtle, just a small stack of rocks carefully balanced in a way that looked almost natural. Almost. But Elena had been trained to spot unnatural patterns, and this was definitely man-made. She approached carefully, studying it from multiple angles. The marker pointed northeast toward her objective. But that didn't make sense. This wasn't a training exercise where they'd mark the path. Hayes had been clear: navigate on your own or fail. So who had left this marker? And why? Elena felt unease prickle down her spine. Something was wrong. She decided to ignore the marker and take a harder route, circling north before turning east. If someone was trying to funnel her onto a specific path, she wanted no part of it. Brennan's voice in her memory: if the easy path looks too easy, it's not a path, it's a trap. 2 hours later, she heard the gunfire. It was distant, maybe 2 miles away, but unmistakable. 3-round burst, probably an M4 rifle. Then silence. Then another burst. Someone was in contact. Elena froze, listening. The wind was from the west, carrying sound but no details. She checked her map. The gunfire was coming from the direction Jake Patterson would have been inserted. Hayes had said there were no hostiles. This was supposed to be a navigation test, but someone was shooting. Elena had a choice: continue her mission and ignore it, or investigate and potentially compromise her own test. She thought about Jake, about the way he'd looked at her last night with something close to respect. She thought about Brennan, about what he would do. Then she adjusted her course and headed toward the sound of gunfire. Hour 9. She found Jake's GPS unit first. It was smashed, the screen shattered, lying in the middle of a game trail, like someone had thrown it there. The casing was cracked, the electronics exposed to rain and dirt. Elena knelt beside it, reading the signs. Boot prints, at least 6 different patterns. Drag marks leading into the forest. and blood not much but enough to know someone had been hurt. Her radio crackled, making her jump. "Miss Brennan, this is Colonel Hayes. Do you copy?" She keyed the mic. "Copy, sir. We've lost contact with candidate Patterson. Last known position was 2 miles from your location. Be advised we're picking up unidentified radio traffic in your area. This may not be a training exercise anymore." Elena felt ice flood her veins. "Sir, are you saying there are actual hostiles in the area?" "We don't know. Could be hunters, could be something else. Either way, you need to be aware. We're sending a response team, but they're 2 hours out." "What about Patterson, sir?" A long pause. "If you can locate him without compromising your own safety, do so. But Brennan, this is your call. You can abort using your emergency beacon, or you can continue the mission. No judgment either way." Elena looked at the blood on the ground, looked at the drag marks leading into thick forest. She thought about Brennan, about the night she'd saved his unit when she was 14, about the promise she'd made at his grave. "Negative on abort, sir. I'm going to find Patterson." "Brennan, that's not ghost out." She cut the transmission and followed the drag marks into the trees. The trail was easy to follow. Whoever had taken Jake wasn't worried about covering their tracks. That worried Elena more than anything else. It suggested they didn't think anyone would come looking, or didn't care if someone did. She moved carefully, every sense alert. Brennan had taught her to hunt, and this was hunting just with higher stakes. After 20 minutes, she heard voices. She dropped into a crouch and moved toward them, using every technique Brennan had drilled into her. Slow movement, low profile, eyes and ears forward. Through the trees, she saw them. 6 men in tactical gear, weapons slung, standing in a small clearing. They weren't American military. The equipment was wrong. The bearing was wrong. Private contractors, maybe. Or something worse. And in the center of the clearing, bound and gagged, was Jake Patterson. Elena assessed the situation. 6 armed men, 1 prisoner, and her alone with nothing but a knife in the element of surprise. The smart move was to wait for Hayes' response team. Let the professionals handle this. But Jake was injured. She could see blood on his head, and 2 hours was a long time to be at the mercy of men who'd already demonstrated they were willing to use violence. She thought about Brennan, about the night he'd been pinned in that ravine waiting for death, about a 14-year-old girl who'd decided to do something instead of nothing. Elena checked her knife, found a good throwing rock, and started planning. Then one of the men pulled out a radio and spoke in accented English. "Da, we have him. Tell Volkov the American is secure." Elena froze. Volkov. Viktor Volkov. The name hit her like a physical blow. She knew that name. Knew it intimately. 2 months ago, she'd been part of a classified operation in Eastern Europe. A raid on an arms depot run by Russian military contractors. The operation had gone sideways, turned into a firefight. In the chaos, Elena had killed a man, Alexei Volkov, one of the contractor leaders. It had been clean, justified. She'd written the report, filed, it moved on. But apparently Alexei had a brother. And apparently Viktor Volkov had been planning this for weeks, waiting for her, knowing she'd be here. This wasn't a training accident. This wasn't random. This was a trap, and she'd walked right into it. The radio crackled again. "Volkov wants the woman alive. He has questions for her." One of the men laughed. "Maybe we have some questions too." "Discipline," the leader snapped. "Volkov pays us for results, not recreation. We wait for the woman to come for her friend, then we take her." Elena's mind raced. They knew she was here, knew she'd come for Jake. They were using him as bait. She could still walk away, continue her mission, let Hayes' team deal with this. But that would mean leaving Jake to die. And despite her promise to Brennan, despite her need to prove herself, she couldn't do that. Brennan wouldn't have. So neither would she. She was still planning her approach when she saw the red laser dots appear on the trees around the clearing. Someone was targeting her position with infrared lasers, which meant night vision, which meant they knew exactly where she was. Elena threw herself backward as the forest erupted in gunfire. The bullets tore through the space where Elena had been standing half a second before. She hit the ground, hard, rolled left, came up behind a massive Douglas fir as bark exploded above her head. Training took over. Brennan's voice in her memory, calm and steady even as chaos erupted around her. When ambushed, you have three options: return fire, take cover, or move. Never freeze. Elena moved. She sprinted downhill, using the terrain to break line of sight, zigzagging between trees as muzzle flashes lit up the forest behind her. A round sparked off a rock inches from her boot. Another whipped past her ear with a crack that made her hearing go tinny. She dove into a ravine, sliding down wet leaves and moss until she hit the bottom in a tangle of roots and cold water. Above her, boots pounded on the forest floor. Voices shouted in Russian. She went down the slope, spread out. Volkov wants her alive. Elena pressed herself into the underside of a fallen log, barely breathing water soaking through her clothes. The cold was immediate and vicious, but she ignored it. Cold was just information. It didn't get to make decisions. Two men ran past her position, night vision goggles glowing green in the darkness. She waited until they were 20 meters past, then slipped out and headed perpendicular to their line of pursuit. The forest here was dense old growth that had never seen a chainsaw, perfect for evasion. She moved through it like smoke, using every shadow, every fold in the terrain. Brennan had taught her this in 100 different forests over 10 years. Taught her until moving silently was as natural as breathing. Behind her, the pursuit spread out. She counted at least 8 distinct voices, maybe 10. And they had night vision, infrared lasers, communications equipment. All the technology that made modern hunters so effective. But technology had weaknesses. Batteries died, electronics failed, and men who relied on machines forgot how to use their eyes and ears. Elena found a dense thicket of salal brush and crawled into it, pulling the branches closed behind her. She was completely invisible, even from 5 feet away. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate through pure discipline. A man passed within arm's reach of her position. She could smell his cigarettes, hear his frustrated breathing as he swept his rifle back and forth. "Nothing," he said into his radio. "She's gone." "Keep looking," came the reply. "Volkov says she's trained in evasion. She'll go to ground and wait us out." The man moved on. Elena waited another 5 minutes, then slipped out of the thicket and headed north, away from both the pursuers and her original objective. She needed information, needed to understand what she was dealing with, and she needed to find Jake before they decided he was more liability than asset. Her radio crackled softly, Hayes' voice tight with tension. "Ghost report status." Elena keyed the mic, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "Contact. Multiple hostiles. At least 8, possibly more. They're using night vision and infrared. And sir, they know my name." A long pause. "Say again." "They called for someone named Volkov. Viktor Volkov. She paused, memories flooding back. "He's the brother of a man I killed 2 months ago in the Kharkov operation." "Jesus Christ." Hayes' voice was grim. "Brennan, this is way above your pay grade. Activate your beacon and we'll extract you." "Negative, sir. They have Patterson. I'm not leaving him." "That's not a request, soldier. That's an order." Elena thought about Brennan, about the promises she'd made, about the kind of soldier he'd trained her to be. "With respect, sir, I can't follow that order. Patterson is alive because I heard gunfire and came to investigate. If I leave now, he dies. And I didn't become a soldier to abandon people." Another long pause. "You're just like your father, stubborn as hell and twice as stupid." But his voice held something that might have been pride. "Fine, response team is 90 minutes out. Can you stay alive that long?" "I've stayed alive in worse situations, sir." "Not against someone like Viktor Volkov. Intel says he's former Spetsnaz, ran contractor operations throughout Eastern Europe. He's professional, well-funded, and apparently very motivated to kill you. Then he's going to be disappointed." Elena cut the transmission and started moving again, circling back toward where they'd been holding Jake. She needed to scout the position, figure out how many hostiles she was really dealing with, and find a way to extract Patterson before Volkov decided to use him as bait in a more permanent way. The forest was lightening now, dawn creeping through the canopy in shades of gray. That was both good and bad. Good because she could see better. Bad because they could see her better. She climbed a rocky outcrop that gave her a view of the clearing where she'd first spotted Jake. The men were still there, but they'd reinforced their position. She counted 6 in the clearing, plus the ones searching for her in the woods. Call it 12 total minimum. And in the center, still bound and gagged, Jake Patterson sat with his back against a tree. His face was bruised blood, crusted on his temple, but he was alert. His eyes swept the forest, looking for help that wasn't coming. Elena studied the terrain. The clearing was in a natural depression, surrounded by higher ground on three sides. Good defensive position. The only approach that didn't involve exposing herself was from the east, where a small creek had carved a channel through the rock. She could use that, but not yet. Not with 12 armed men on high alert. She needed to change the equation, needed to make them react instead of act. Brennan had taught her that outnumbered enemies had one advantage: they controlled the initiative. But that advantage evaporated the moment you made them chase ghosts instead of hunt prey. Elena smiled grimly and started planning. 20 minutes later, she was a quarter-mile from the clearing when she found what she needed. A dead fall, a massive cedar that had come down in a storm, its root ball torn from the earth and leaving a depression 10 feet deep. The tree itself was dry as tinder, perfect for what she had in mind. She gathered pine needles and small branches, piled them at the base of the deadfall, then used her fire starter to get a small blaze going. Once it was established, she added larger branches, building the fire until smoke started to rise thick and black. Forest fire in the Pacific Northwest. In November, the smoke would be visible for miles. Every agency from the Forest Service to the park rangers would respond. And more importantly, it would bring Hayes's response team at a dead run. But it would also force Volkov's hand. He'd have to decide stay and fight with reinforcements incoming or cut his losses and run. Elena moved away from the fire, circling back toward the clearing. She gave the smoke 15 minutes to build, to be noticed, to cause the kind of panic that disrupted careful plans. Then she heard it, shouting from the clearing, the snap of orders being given. She crept closer, using the terrain for cover, until she could see what was happening. The men were breaking camp, moving fast, grabbing equipment, and preparing to evacuate. One of them was on a radio speaking rapid Russian. Another was pulling Jake to his feet, none too gently. But they weren't running blindly. They were moving with military precision, covering each other, maintaining security even in their haste. Professional. Just like Hayes had said. Elena counted heads. 12 visible, which meant everyone was in the clearing. No rear guard, no scouts. They were consolidating for movement. That was a mistake. She found a position 30 yards from the clearing, behind a jumble of boulders that gave her both cover and concealment. Then she found a rock about the size of a baseball and threw it hard into the trees to the south. The crash of branches brought instant reaction. 4 weapons swung toward the sound, men shouting, someone firing, a burst into the forest. In the confusion, Elena moved. She sprinted across an open patch of ground, dove behind a log, came up in a new position 20 yards closer. Another rock, this time to the west. More shouting, more weapons pointing in the wrong direction. She was hunting them now, using their own numbers against them, their own discipline. They were trained to respond as a unit, which meant they all looked the same direction and all focused on the same threat. While she hit them from wherever they weren't looking. The leader, a big man with a shaved head and a scar across his jaw, shouted something that stopped the chaos. The men reorganized, creating a defensive perimeter. Smart, but it locked them in place, made them stationary. Elena found another rock. This time she threw it straight at the leader, hard and fast. It caught him in the shoulder. He spun, weapon raised, scanning for a target. She was already gone, melting into the forest, leaving no trace. "She's playing with us," someone said in Russian. "Then let's give her something to play with," another voice answered. Cold, calm, commanding, a new figure stepped into the clearing. Tall, lean, with the kind of confidence that came from years of command. He wore civilian clothes but moved like a soldier. Late 40s, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. Viktor Volkov. He studied the forest head, tilted, listening. Then he pulled out a radio and spoke in English, his accent precise and educated. "Miss Brennan, I know you can hear me." His voice carried across the clearing, amplified by a speaker. "You're very good. Your father trained you well, but you're making this harder than it needs to be." Elena froze. He was talking to her directly, trying to engage her, draw her out. "I don't want to kill you," Volkov continued. "I want to talk about what happened in Kharkov, about my brother Alexei." He paused, letting that sink in. "You killed him, yes, in a firefight. I understand it was combat. I understand you were following orders." His voice dropped, became almost conversational. "But he was my brother. The only family I had left, and I cannot let his death go unanswered. Elena's jaw clenched. She'd killed men before. It was part of the job, part of being a soldier. But she'd never had to face the family of those she'd killed. However, Volkov said, I'm a practical man. I don't believe in revenge for revenge's sake. So here's my proposal. Surrender yourself, and I let your friend Patterson go. He walks away, flies home, forgets this ever happened. You and I, we have a conversation. Then we'll see. Don't do it, Jake's voice hoarse but strong. One of the guards hit him, and he grunted in pain. Volkov sighed. I'm trying to be reasonable here, but my patience has limits. He checked his watch. You have 5 minutes to decide. Show yourself or Patterson dies. Simple as that. He nodded to one of his men who pressed a pistol against Jake's head. Elena calculated distances, angles, probabilities. 12 men. 1 hostage. No clear shot. No way to extract Jake without exposing herself to overwhelming fire. But if she didn't try, Jake died. And she'd have to live with that. She thought about Brennan, about the night she'd saved his unit when the smart move was to stay hidden and hope for the best. Brennan had taught her that being a soldier meant making impossible choices. It meant doing what was right even when what was right meant you probably died trying. She was reaching for her knife, preparing to move when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Mechanical, distant but growing closer. A helicopter. Volkov heard it too. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the sky. Chert, he swore in Russian. Then to his men, time to go. Kill the prisoner. The man with the pistol adjusted his aim. Elena made her choice. She stood up from behind the boulder's, knife in hand, and shouted, Volkov! Every weapon in the clearing swung toward her. 12 rifles, 12 men, all focused on the crazy woman standing in the open with nothing but a knife. For a moment, time stopped. Elena saw it all with perfect clarity, the surprise on Volkov's face, the finger tightening on the trigger aimed at Jake, the helicopter sound growing louder. Then Volkov smiled. Brave, or stupid. With your generation, it's hard to tell which. He raised a hand, stopping his men from firing. But I respect the gesture. Sergei, lower your weapon. The man with the pistol hesitated, then obeyed. Volkov walked toward Elena, stopping 10 feet away. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his eyes, the calculation. This was a man who'd survived decades of warfare through planning and adaptation. You look like him, Volkov said quietly. Your father, Brennan. I saw photos from his military file. You have his eyes. Let Patterson go, Elena said, like you promised. I said if you surrendered, walking into the open isn't the same as surrendering. Volkov tilted his head. But I'm a man of my word. Sergei cut him loose. The guard cut Jake's bonds. Jake stumbled to his feet, looking between Elena and Volkov with confusion and fear. Run, Elena said without taking her eyes off Volkov. But, run, Jake ran, stumbling through the forest toward the sound of the helicopter. Volkov watched him go with amusement. Chivalrous, old-fashioned. Your father taught you well. He gestured to his men. Lower your weapons. The lady has earned a conversation. The rifles dropped marginally. Lena didn't relax. This was a predator playing with prey, nothing more. What happened in Kharkov wasn't personal, she said. Your brother was shooting at my team. I returned fire. That's combat. I know. Volkov's voice was mild. I've read the after-action reports. All very proper, very justified. My brother was where he shouldn't have been doing what he shouldn't have done. He paused. But that doesn't change the fact that he's dead and you're alive. So what now? You kill me to balance the scales. Maybe, or maybe I offer you a job. That surprised her. She let it show. Volkov smiled. I run a contracting company, former military like you, like your father. We do work that governments can't officially do, and we pay very, very well. Someone with your skills, your training, you'd be valuable. I'm not a mercenary. No, you're a soldier who takes orders and gets paid a fraction of what you're worth. I'm offering you a chance to change that, to use your skills for yourself instead of for politicians who don't know your name and wouldn't care if they did. The helicopter was close now, maybe a mile out. Elena could see the calculation in Volkov's eyes. He was running out of time. Think about it, he said. Your father spent his life serving a country that let him die in a VA hospital, forgotten by everyone except you. Is that really the legacy you want? Or would you prefer to make your own fortune, your own choices? My father died with honor, Elena said coldly. That's worth more than any amount of money. Volkov's smile faded. Honor. That's what they tell us to keep us poor and loyal. He shook his head. You disappoint me, Miss Brennan. I thought you'd be smarter than that. He stepped back, nodded to his men. Secure her. Gently. We're taking her with us. Two men moved toward Elena. She backed up, knife ready, but there was nowhere to go. Behind her, Forrest. In front, armed professionals. Above, a helicopter that was still too far away to help. She was out of options. Then the world exploded in smoke and chaos. The fire she'd started had spread faster than she'd anticipated, driven by wind and dry underbrush. A wall of smoke rolled through the clearing, thick and choking, reducing visibility to nothing. Elena dropped, flat-rolled sideways, heard bullets crack overhead as Volkov's men fired blind into the smoke. She scrambled into the trees, lungs burning, eyes streaming. Behind her, men shouted orders. Weapons barked, chaos reigned. She ran, not away from the helicopter, but toward it, using the smoke as cover. Her lungs screamed for clean air. Her eyes watered so badly she could barely see. But she kept moving, because that's what Brennan had taught her. When everything goes to hell, you move. You adapt. You survive. She broke out of the smoke cloud and nearly collided with Jake Patterson. He was doubled over, coughing, his face black with soot. Come on. She grabbed his arm, pulled him forward. They ran together through the forest, the helicopter sound growing louder, close enough now that she could feel the rotor wash through the trees. Behind them, Volkov's voice cut through the chaos, amplified by his radio. I'll see you again, Miss Brennan, count on it. Elena didn't look back. She just ran. The helicopter landed in a small clearing 100 yards ahead. Hayes was standing in the door, rifle in hand, three other operators behind him. Elena and Jake stumbled into the clearing just as Volkov's men broke through the tree line behind them. Bullets cracked through the air. Hayes' team returned fire-controlled bursts that drove the attackers back into cover. Get in, Hayes shouted. Elena shoved Jake toward the helicopter, then turned back, seeing movement in the trees. One of Volkov's men was raising his rifle, aiming at the helicopter. Without thinking, she charged him. Closed the distance in 3 long strides, drove her knife up under his ribs as he spun to face her. His eyes went wide with shock. The rifle clattered to the ground. Elena pulled the knife free, let him fall, and ran for the helicopter. Hayes grabbed her arm, hauled her inside as the pilot pulled pitch. The helicopter lifted off, with bullets sparking off the armored hull. Elena collapsed on the deck, lungs heaving, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Jake was beside her, looking at her with something between awe and terror. You came back for me. Of course I did. While you could have completed your mission, could have set the record. Instead, I didn't become a soldier to abandon people. Elena said the same words she'd told Hayes. My father taught me better than that. Hayes crouched beside them, his face grim. Volkov. Alive. He's got at least 12 men, maybe more. Professional, well-equipped, and motivated. Elena met his eyes. And he's going to come after me again. Let him try. Next time we'll be ready. Hayes paused. You did good work down there, Brendan. Saved Patterson's life, evaded a superior force, started a forest fire to cover your escape that was inspired by the way. It's what my father would have done. Hayes almost smiled. Yeah, it is. He stood up. Get some rest. We'll debrief when we get back to base. Elena leaned back against the helicopter's hull, feeling the vibration through her body, watching the forest fall away beneath them. She reached into her jacket and pulled out Brennan's compass. The glass was cracked. Must have happened during the fight, but the needle still swung, true still pointed, north still worked exactly as it was supposed to, like everything Brennan had taught her. The tools didn't matter as much as the skill to use them. Jake was watching her. That compass saved us, you know. Not the technology I was carrying. That got destroyed first thing. But your old school gear, your old school training, that's what got us out. Elena closed the compass carefully. My father used to say technology fails, training doesn't. He was right. Jake paused. I'm sorry I doubted you. Sorry I made that crack about your gear being suicide. Forget it. You didn't know. No, but I should have. Should have realized that someone trained by James Brennan would know exactly what they were doing. He extended his hand. "Thank you for saving my life. I owe you." Elena shook his hand. "You don't owe me anything. We're soldiers. It's what we do." The helicopter banked heading back toward Fort Lewis. Below them, smoke rose from the forest in a thick black column. Fire crews would be mobilizing, rangers would be investigating, and somewhere in that chaos, Viktor Volkov was escaping. This wasn't over. Volkov had been too calm, too confident. He'd planned this operation carefully, anticipated her arrival, prepared for complications. Men like that didn't give up after one failure. He'd be back. And next time he'd be better prepared. But so would she. Elena closed her eyes, letting the helicopter's vibration lull her toward exhaustion. She'd been awake for over 30 hours, had run at least 15 miles through brutal terrain, had evaded a trained enemy force, and had survived an encounter with a man who wanted her dead. Not bad for hour 45 of a 72-hour test. Except there was no test anymore. The mission had changed from proving herself to Ghost Unit to surviving a vendetta she'd earned by doing her job. When they landed at Fort Lewis, there was a crowd waiting. Medical personnel, officers, security forces. Jake was whisked away to the infirmary despite his protest that he was fine. Elena tried to follow, but Hayes stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. "You need medical attention, too." "I'm fine, sir." Hayes looked at the blood on her jacket, some hers, some from the man she'd killed, and raised an eyebrow. "That's an order, Sergeant." "Yes, sir." The medical exam was quick and professional. Minor cuts, bruises, mild smoke inhalation, dehydration. Nothing serious. They cleaned her up, gave her IV fluids, and released her with instructions to rest. But rest wasn't happening yet. Colonel Mitchell wanted to see her. Mitchell's office was Spartan and efficient, like the woman herself. She stood behind her desk when Elena entered, studying her with sharp eyes. "Sergeant Brennan, sit." Elena sat. Mitchell remained standing, hands clasped behind her back. "I've received preliminary reports from Colonel Hayes. You engaged an enemy force of approximately 12 hostiles, evaded capture, rescued a fellow candidate, and coordinated your own extraction. That's exceptional work under impossible circumstances." "Thank you, ma'am." "However, you also abandoned your mission objective, set fire to federal forest land, and killed a foreign national on U.S. soil. That's going to create paperwork nightmares for the next month." Elena said nothing. Mitchell wasn't looking for excuses. The colonel walked to her window, looked out at the rain-soaked base. "Viktor Volkov is now a confirmed threat. CIA has a file on him. Former Spetsnaz runs a private military company operating in gray zones across Eastern Europe. His brother Alexei was killed during the Kharkov operation, just like you said." She turned back to Elena. "Volkov's company has connections to Russian intelligence. This wasn't just personal revenge. This was a field test." That got Elena's attention. "A field test, ma'am. Volkov is developing advanced tracking systems, thermal imaging, AI-assisted targeting network sensors. He's trying to prove they can hunt anyone, anywhere, regardless of training." Mitchell's expression was grim. "You were his proof of concept. If he could catch you trained by one of the best operating in familiar terrain, he could sell his system to anyone. But he didn't catch me." "No, you survived using old-school skills that his technology couldn't counter. That's embarrassing for him. And men like Volkov don't handle embarrassment well." Mitchell sat down, folding her hands on her desk. "He's going to try again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually." "Then I'll be ready, ma'am." Mitchell studied her. "Your father would say the same thing. Hayes told me about Brennan's letter about his recommendation. He clearly believed you had what it takes for Ghost Unit." Elena felt her heart rate pick up. "Ma'am, the Ghost Protocol test was meant to evaluate navigation and survival skills under stress. You demonstrated those skills under actual combat conditions, against a professional enemy force, while saving a fellow soldier." Mitchell leaned forward. "In my opinion, you've passed, but the final decision isn't mine. It's Colonel Hayes's. He runs Ghost Unit, his call." "I understand, ma'am." "Dismissed. Get some real rest. We'll reconvene tomorrow for full debrief." Elena stood, saluted, and walked out, feeling like she was floating. Exhaustion made everything feel distant and unreal. She made it back to her barracks, stripped out of her filthy clothes, and stood under a hot shower until the water ran cold. When she finally climbed into her bunk, every muscle in her body screaming, she pulled out Brennan's compass one more time. The crack in the glass had spread spider webbing across the face, but the needle still worked, still pointed true. She thought about Volkov's offer, about working for money instead of honor, about choosing fortune over duty. Brennan had faced those same choices, had been offered contractor jobs that paid 5 times his military salary. He turned them all down because he believed in something more than profit. Elena set the compass on her nightstand where she could see it. Then she closed her eyes and fell into dreamless sleep. She woke 8 hours later to someone knocking on her door. She rolled out of bed, every muscle protesting, and opened it to find Hayes standing there. "Get dressed," he said. "We need to talk." 10 minutes later, she was following him across the base to a building she'd never entered before. The Ghost Unit headquarters. Inside, the walls were covered with maps, photos, mission reports. A dozen operators worked at computer stations planning operations that would never appear in official records. Hayes led her to a conference room and closed the door. They were alone. "Sit," he said. Elena sat. Hayes remained standing, studying her the way a jeweler might study a diamond looking for flaws. "I've been running Ghost Unit for 5 years. In that time, I've tested 47 candidates. Only 8 passed. You would be the 9th. Elena's breath caught. The test is designed to be completed under controlled conditions. Navigate to a checkpoint, retrieve a package return. Simple navigation and survival." Hayes paused. "You didn't complete that test. You abandoned the mission to rescue Patterson." "Yes, sir. That was the right decision, the moral decision, but it cost you the mission." Hayes crossed his arms. "So the question is, do I count that as a pass or a fail?" Elena thought about Brennan, about what he would say. Then she met Hayes's eyes. "Sir, with respect, I don't think it matters." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "The test is meant to evaluate whether someone can operate alone under stress, whether they have the skills and judgment to complete missions without support. I demonstrated those skills against a real enemy in real combat." She kept her voice level. "But more than that, I demonstrated the judgment to choose lives over records. If that's a failing in your eyes, then Ghost Unit isn't where I belong anyway." Silence. Hayes stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, actually smiled. "That's exactly what your father said to me in '92, word for word, near as I can remember." He pulled out a chair and sat down. "I gave him the same test. He also abandoned the mission to help wounded soldiers he encountered. And when I asked him if he understood that meant failing, he said the same thing you just did." Elena felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. "Your father was the best operator I ever served with," Hayes said quietly. "Not because he was the fastest or the strongest, but because he understood what being a soldier actually means. It's not about following orders blindly. It's about making the right choice when the easy choice is available." He stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome to Ghost Unit, Sergeant Brennan. You've earned it." Elena stood, shook his hand, felt the weight of it. The promise kept. The legacy honored. "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. We've got a problem named Viktor Volkov, and he's not going away. You're going to be the bait to draw him out." Hayes's expression hardened. "But next time we'll be ready for him. And we're going to show him that old school training beats new technology every single time." "Yes, sir." Hayes opened the door. "Get your gear sorted. Report back here at 0800 tomorrow. We've got work to do." Elena walked out of Ghost Unit headquarters feeling like she was 10 feet tall. She made it halfway across the base before her legs started shaking, before the weight of the last 48 hours crashed down on her. She found a bench, sat down, and pulled out Brennan's compass. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, "just like you knew we would." The compass needle swung north and held steady, pointing toward whatever came next. 3 weeks after joining Ghost Unit, Elena Brennan stood in a briefing room studying satellite imagery of a compound in the Cascade Mountains. Same mountain range where she'd nearly died. Different location. Same enemy. Viktor Volkov. Hayes stood at the front of the room, pointer in hand, his expression carved from stone. Beside Elena sat Jake Patterson, now fully recovered and assigned as her partner for this operation. On her other side was Ryan Matthews, a 32-year-old sergeant with 10 years of special operations experience and a photograph of his 7-year-old daughter taped to his rifle stock. Intel confirms Volkov has established a base of operations here. Hayes tapped the screen approximately 50 miles northeast of where you encountered him, Brennan. He's holding a high-value target, Dr. Chalmers J. Boschoa. Nathan Cross, a physicist who was captured 3 weeks ago while consulting on a civilian project. A photo appeared on the screen. A tired-looking man in his late 40s, glasses, thinning hair, the unmistakable appearance of someone more comfortable in a laboratory than a war zone. Cross specializes in advanced sensor technology, Hayes continued. Before his capture, he was working on next-generation thermal imaging systems for the Department of Defense. Systems that can detect human heat signatures through dense vegetation with 97% accuracy. Elena felt ice settle in her stomach. She remembered Volkov's words in the forest, about proving that technology could hunt anyone anywhere. We believe Volkov is forcing Cross to complete this technology, Hayes said. Once operational, it would make covert operations nearly impossible. Every operator, every infiltration, every ghost in the night becomes visible. His eyes found Elena's. It would make everything your father taught you obsolete. Jake leaned forward. So we extract Cross and destroy the research. Standard recovery operation. Not standard, Hayes corrected. Volkov knows we're coming, knows that we can't leave Cross in his hands. This entire compound is designed as a trap, for us, specifically for her. He nodded at Elena. Matthew spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the flat affect of a man who'd seen too much. Sir, if it's a trap, why are we walking into it? Because Cross is too valuable to lose. Because Volkov's technology represents an existential threat to special operations worldwide. And because Hayes' expression hardened. We don't let foreign operatives conduct military operations on U.S. soil without consequences. He pulled up architectural plans. The compound is built around an old mining facility. Concrete bunkers, underground tunnels, natural cave systems. Defensive positions on 3 sides, cliff face on the 4th. Volkov has approximately 20 personnel on site. All former special forces, all heavily armed. 20 against 3, Jake muttered. Great odds. 4, Hayes corrected. I'm coming with you. That surprised everyone. Hayes hadn't operated in the field for over 3 years, but the look on his face said the decision was final. Elena studied the compound's layout, her mind automatically running through approaches. The terrain was brutal. Dense forest, steep ravines, natural choke points that any defender would exploit. But there were patterns here, weaknesses born from overconfidence. Sir, she said quietly, Volkov's going to expect a direct approach. He set up his defenses for conventional tactics. Night insertion, progressive clearance, tactical superiority through firepower. Agreed, Hayes said, which is why we're not doing that. Brennan, you'll insert solo 48 hours before the main assault. Your job is reconnaissance and sabotage. Find Cross, locate the research, identify vulnerabilities. When we hit the compound, you'll already be inside, creating chaos from within. It was the kind of mission Brennan had trained her for. Solo infiltration, no backup, living off skill and nerve. But the stakes were higher now. Volkov would be waiting, would have planned for this. What's the extraction plan? Matthews asked. Hayes pulled up a map showing a river crossing 3 miles from the compound. Once Cross is secured and the research is destroyed, you extract here. We'll have air support standing by, but Volkov likely has anti-aircraft capabilities, so the primary extraction is overland on foot through terrain that heavily favors the defender. And if Volkov catches one of us, Jake's voice was quiet. Hayes met his eyes. Then you remember your training, you remember why you're a soldier, and you make sure Volkov regrets it. The briefing continued for another hour. Details piled on details. Insertion vectors, communication protocols, contingency plans. But Elena's mind kept returning to one fact: Volkov had planned this. He'd captured Cross, set up the compound, and now he was waiting for them to come. This was his game, his board, his rules, which meant they needed to change the game. After the briefing, Elena found Matthews in the armory loading magazines with methodical precision. Each round seated perfectly, each movement practiced until it was automatic. Can I ask you something, Sergeant? Elena said. Matthews looked up. His face was weathered, lined with stress that had nothing to do with age. Shoot. Why'd you volunteer for this? You've got a daughter. Photo on your rifle says she's 7. That's young enough to need her father. Matthew's jaw tightened. That's exactly why I volunteered. Sophie lives in a world where men like Volkov operate freely, where technology designed to protect people gets turned into weapons to hunt them. If I can stop one of those men, maybe she grows up a little safer. That's a lot of pressure to put on one mission. It's a lot of pressure to put on any mission, Matthews countered. But that's the job. We carry the weight so our kids don't have to. Elena thought about Brennan, about the weight he'd carried for 23 years until cancer finally took him down, about the promise he'd made her keep. My father used to say something similar, she said quietly, that being a soldier meant standing between the world's darkness and the people who deserve light. Matthew smiled slightly. Sounds like he was a wise man. He was, but wisdom didn't protect him from dying in a VA hospital, forgotten by everyone except me. He wasn't forgotten. He trained you, passed on everything he knew. That's not being forgotten. That's immortality. Matthews loaded another magazine. My daughter won't remember most of my deployments, but she'll remember that her father did something that mattered. That's enough. Elena wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that sacrifice and duty and honor actually meant something in a world that seemed to value none of those things. But doubt was easier than faith. She left Matthews to his preparations and found Hayes in his office reviewing intelligence reports. He looked up when she entered, gestured to a chair. Something on your mind, Brennan? Elena sat. Sir, can I speak freely? Always. This mission feels wrong. Volkov's too smart to build a compound this obvious to hold a prisoner this valuable without multiple layers of contingency. He knows we're coming. He's planned for it. We're walking into exactly the situation he wants. Hayes leaned back in his chair. You're not wrong, this has trap written all over it. But sometimes you walk into traps because the alternative is worse. And if we lose people, if Matthews doesn't come home to his daughter, then we make sure his death means something. Hayes' expression was iron. I've been doing this for 30 years, Brennan. I've lost good soldiers. Men I trained, men I trusted, men I considered family. Each one of them knew the risks. Each one of them chose to serve anyway. He stood, walked to his window overlooking the base. Your father and I served together for 12 years. We were in places you've never heard of doing things that will never be declassified. And I watched him make the same choice you're making now to walk toward danger because someone had to. Did he ever regret it? Every damn day, Hayes said bluntly. But he did it anyway, because regret is the price of living with honor. If you're not willing to pay that price, you shouldn't be in this unit. Elena absorbed that, felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. I'll be ready, sir. I know you will. You're Brennan's daughter. Being ready is in your blood. The next 48 hours blurred together. Equipment checks, physical preparation, mental rehearsal. Elena ran the mission in her mind 100 times, imagining every possible complication, every potential failure point. She packed her gear with obsessive care. Minimal electronics, maximum redundancy. Brennan's compass, his knife tools that had proven themselves when technology failed. The night before insertion, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing. Finally, she gave up and went for a walk around the base. She found herself at the memorial wall, brass plaques listing the names of soldiers who'd died in service. She ran her fingers over them, reading names, ranks, dates. Lives reduced to 3 lines of text. Can't sleep either. She turned to find Jake standing behind her, hands in his pockets, looking as restless as she felt. Too much in my head, Elena admitted. Jake nodded, moved to stand beside her. I keep thinking about that moment in the forest, when you stood up from behind those boulders with nothing but a knife. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Probably both. Definitely both. Jake paused. But it saved my life, and I haven't really thanked you properly for that. You don't need to thank me. We're soldiers. We protect each other. Yeah, but most soldiers don't charge armed men with just a knife. He looked at her seriously. Why'd you do it, In? Elena thought about how to answer that, about Brennan's lessons, about promises made at gravesides, about the kind of person she'd chosen to become. Because my father taught me that being a soldier isn't about following orders blindly. It's about doing what's right when everything else would be easier. You needed help, so I helped. That's all. Jake shook his head slowly. That's not all, that's everything. He extended his hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I trust you completely. If I'm going into hell, I'm glad you're leading the way. Elena shook his hand, felt the sincerity in his grip. Don't trust me too much. I'm still figuring this out as I go. So was your father, probably. That's what made him great. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. He just kept moving forward. After Jake left, Elena stayed at the memorial wall for another hour, reading names, thinking about sacrifice, wondering if her own name would end up here someday. Then she went back to her barracks, pulled out Brennan's compass, and held it until dawn. The insertion was textbook. Helicopter dropped her 3 miles from the compound at 200 hours, low and fast, barely touching down before lifting off again. Elena hit the ground running, disappearing into the forest before the sound of rotors faded. The night was cold and clear, perfect visibility, perfect conditions for hunting or being hunted. She moved through this darkness using every skill Brennan had taught her. Silent footfalls, minimal profile, constant awareness of wind and sound. The forest here was different from where she'd trained, but forests spoke the same language once you learned to listen. It took her 6 hours to cover 3 miles. Not because the terrain was difficult, but because she took no chances. She scouted every approach, checked every sight line, moved only when she was certain the path was clear. By 0800 hours, she was in position on a ridge overlooking Volkov's compound. She spent the next 12 hours watching, learning patrol patterns, identifying weak points, counting heads. Volkov had 20 men, just like intelligence said, but they were professionals. No wasted movement, no casual gaps in coverage. The compound itself was impressive. Concrete bunkers built into the hillside connected by underground tunnels. Guard towers at the corners overlapping fields of fire. A single road and easily blocked or defended. But there were weaknesses. There always were. The question was whether she could exploit them before Volkov figured out she was here. As night fell, Elena began her infiltration. Not through the obvious approaches, but through a drainage culvert she'd spotted running from the compound to a creek bed below. It was narrow, barely large enough for her to crawl through and probably alarmed. But it was also the route no one would expect. She reached the culvert entrance at 2100 hours, checked for sensors, found 2. Both were basic pressure switches, easy to bypass if you knew what you were looking for. Brennan had taught her well. The crawl through the culvert took 30 minutes. It was claustrophobic, wet, and utterly dark. Elena moved by touch alone, breathing through her nose, fighting the instinct to panic when the walls pressed in. She emerged inside the compound's perimeter in a maintenance area near the bunker complex. No guards visible, but cameras covered the obvious approaches. She avoided them using shadows and dead angles until she reached the main bunker entrance. The door was locked electronically, but there was a ventilation shaft nearby leading down. Brennan had taught her that every fortress had its weak points. Usually they were the boring, maintenance-related things that planners forgot about. 20 minutes later, she was inside the bunker complex, moving through corridors lit by emergency lighting. She could hear voices ahead, footsteps, the hum of generators. The compound was active alert. She found Cross in the third room she checked. He was alone, working at a computer terminal, surrounded by equipment she didn't recognize. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and pale. Elena approached quietly, keeping to the shadows. Cross didn't notice her until she was standing right behind him. "Dr. Cross," she whispered. He spun, eyes wide with terror, mouth opening to shout. Elena's hand covered his mouth. "I'm an American soldier. I'm here to get you out, but I need you to stay quiet, understand?" Cross nodded frantically. She removed her hand. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Ghost Unit. Colonel Hayes sent me. We're extracting you tomorrow night." "Tomorrow night, they're moving me tomorrow morning. Volkov's taking me to a secondary location. Once I'm there, you'll never find me." Unless Elena's mind raced. The mission timeline just collapsed. If Cross was being moved, she couldn't wait for Hayes and the team. She had to act now. "Can you walk? Are you injured?" "I can walk, but there are 20 guards between us and freedom. And Volkov," Cross's voice dropped even lower, "Volkov knows you're coming. He's been planning for this. The whole compound is a trap designed to capture you specifically." "I know. That's why I came in the way I did. Elena checked her watch. 22:30 hours. The main assault was scheduled for tomorrow at 0200. She had 3 hours to extract Cross and sabotage the research before all hell broke loose. Where's the thermal detection system? Cross gestured to the equipment around him. Here, all of it. The prototype, the research data, everything. Volkov wants it operational by tomorrow so he can use it during your assault. Elena studied the equipment. It looked fragile, important, exactly the kind of thing that would shatter if you hit it hard enough. Can you destroy it? Physically, yes, but Volkov has backups. Encrypted drives, off-site storage. Destroying this just sets him back a few weeks. Then we destroy this and take the drives with us. Cross looked at her like she was insane. Have you seen how many men are guarding this place? I've seen them. I've also seen ways out they don't know about. Elena pulled out a small demolition charge from her pack. Can you rig this to destroy the equipment completely? Cross took the charge with shaking hands. Yes, but the explosion will alert everyone. We'll never make it out. That's why we're not running, we're hiding. Elena pointed to a maintenance access panel on the floor. Where does that lead? Tunnel system. It connects all the bunkers, but it's patrolled. Not if we time it right. Elena checked her watch again. Guard shift changes in 20 minutes. That gives us a window. We set the charge hide in the tunnels, wait for the chaos, then slip out during the confusion. That's insane. That's improvisation. Elena allowed herself a small smile. My father taught me that plans fall apart on contact. What matters is adapting faster than the enemy. Cross stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, let's do it. They worked quickly. Cross rigged the demolition charge to the main equipment array, set the timer for 15 minutes. Elena grabbed every data drive she could find, stuffed them in her pack. That's everything? She asked. Everything here. But Volkov keeps his personal backups in his office. 2 levels down. Elena closed her eyes, ran through the compound layout in her mind. Volkov's office would be heavily guarded. Getting in and out would be nearly impossible. But nearly impossible wasn't the same as impossible. Show me where it is on the map. Cross pulled up a schematic on the computer. Pointed to a room in the lower level. There, but Elena, it's suicide. Even if you get in, you'll never get out. Then I'll make sure the drives are destroyed before they catch me. She pulled out her radio, keyed it to Hayes' frequency. Ghost leader, this is Ghost Actual. Mission timeline compromised. Target is being moved. I'm extracting early with partial research data. Main research core is in Volkov's personal office lower level. I'm going after it. Hayes' voice came back tight with tension. Negative Ghost. That's too hot. Extract Cross and fall back. We'll hit the office during the main assault. Sir, if Cross is being moved, we don't have time. And if Volkov gets away with the research, this whole operation means nothing. A long pause, then. Your call, Brennan, but if you're compromised, we're 3 hours out. You'll be on your own. Understood, sir. Ghost out. She turned to Cross. Get into that tunnel. Follow it north until you reach the drainage culvert I came in through. It'll take you outside the perimeter. Once you're clear, activate this beacon. She handed him an emergency transponder. Hayes' team will pick you up. What about you? I'm getting those drives one way or another. Cross gripped her arm. Don't do this. The research isn't worth your life. It's worth exactly my life. That's what being a soldier means. Elena checked her weapons, her gear. Everything was ready. Now go. You've got 12 minutes before this place turns into a war zone. Cross hesitated, then nodded. He opened the maintenance access, climbed down into the darkness below. Elena waited until he was gone, then turned toward the corridor, toward Volkov's office, toward whatever came next. The demolition charge ticked down behind her. 10 minutes. 9. 8. She moved through the corridors like smoke. 2 guards passed within feet of her position. She let them go, staying hidden, conserving her strength for what was coming. Volkov's office was exactly where Cross said it would be. The door was reinforced steel, electronically locked, with a guard posted outside. One man heavily armed, alert. Elena studied him from the shadows. She could take him quietly, but that would leave a body someone would find. Better to wait for the explosion, use the chaos. 7 minutes. 6. 5. The guard's radio crackled. Someone reporting in from a different section of the compound. Normal chatter, everything is routine. 4 minutes. 3. Elena readied herself. Muscles loose, breathing, controlled, mind clear. When the explosion came, she had maybe 30 seconds to move before the compound went into full lockdown. 2 minutes. She thought about Brennan, about everything he taught her, about the promise she'd made. 1 minute. The guard shifted, checked his watch, utterly unaware that his world was about to explode. 30 seconds. Elena's hand moved to her knife. One clean strike. Fast and final. No hesitation. 20 seconds. She started forward, silent as death itself. 10 seconds. The guard turned suddenly alert, as if sensing something wrong. 5 seconds. Their eyes met. 4, 3, 2. The explosion ripped through the upper level with a roar that shook the entire compound. Lights flickered, alarms screamed, and chaos erupted in an instant. The guard spun toward the sound weapon, coming up radio to his mouth. Elena hit him like a freight train. Her knife drove up under his ribs, angled toward the heart. His eyes went wide with shock and pain. She held him as he collapsed, easing him to the ground silently, professionally. 1 second to confirm he was dead. 2 seconds to drag him into an alcove. 3 seconds to use his key card on Volkov's door. The lock clicked open. Elena slipped inside, closed the door behind her, and found herself face to face with Viktor Volkov. He sat behind his desk, utterly calm, a pistol resting on the surface within easy reach. "Miss Brennan," he said with a slight smile. "Right on schedule." Elena's hand moved to her knife, but Volkov raised a hand. "Please, no theatrics. I knew you'd come for the backup drives, and I've decided something." "What's that?" "That I'm tired of this vendetta. My brother died in combat. That's the risk we all take." He stood slowly. "So I'm offering you a trade. Take the drives, destroy the research. In return, I disappear. No more hunting you, no more games." "Why would I trust you?" "Because I'm pragmatic. This war cost me money and men, and you've proven your father trained you well enough that catching you isn't worth the price." He slid a data case across the desk. "All the backups, everything. Take it and go." Elena studied him. This was a trap. Had to be. But the demolition charge upstairs had 3 minutes left. Cross was escaping. She had what she came for. "If I see you on U.S. soil again," she said, taking the case, "the deal's off." "Understood. Until we meet again, Miss Brennan. Perhaps under better circumstances." Elena backed toward the door. Volkov made no move to stop her. She disappeared into the tunnels as the charges detonated above, bringing down the compound in cascading explosions. She emerged from the drainage culvert to find Hayes and the team waiting. Cross was with them, alive and safe. "Mission accomplished?" Hayes asked. Elena held up the data case. "Complete." The extraction was clean. Helicopter to Fort Lewis, 3 days of debriefing, and then the ceremony. Hayes assembled the full Ghost unit. "Sergeant Brennan, in 47 hours and 12 minutes, you completed what should have been impossible. You set a new unit record. You proved that old-school skills still matter in a high-tech world." He held out the Ghost unit patch. "Welcome to the team. You've earned this." Elena took the patch, felt the weight of Brennan's legacy in her hands. "Thank you, sir." That evening, she visited Arlington National Cemetery, knelt at Brennan's grave, and placed his compass on the headstone. "We did it, Dad. Ghost unit, just like you knew I could." The compass needle swung north and held steady, pointing toward whatever came next. 3 months later, she stood before a class of new recruits teaching navigation without GPS, using Brennan's compass, passing on his lessons. "Technology fails," she told them. "Training doesn't. Remember that." One recruit asked, "Ma'am, what if we get lost?" Elena smiled. "You will. That's how you learn to get found." As she dismissed them, her phone buzzed. "Hayes, new mission, briefing at 0800. The work continued. It always did. Elena checked Brennan's compass one more time. The crack in the glass caught the sunlight, throwing rainbows across the wall. Some things broke and became useless. Others broke and became stronger. Became legacy. She headed toward the briefing room, toward the next mission, toward whatever the future held. The compass needle pointed true north. Always.